Hello, my name is Benjamin Hart. I'm an American attorney and the Managing Director of Integrity Legal here in Bangkok, Thailand. In this video, I'm going to briefly discuss and sort of hit the broad strokes of the issue of surrogacy in Thailand. What we're talking about here is surrogacy, whereby an individual or individuals will undertake to have a surrogate go ahead and carry a child on behalf of, in most cases, a couple who essentially need assistance with reproductive matters to go ahead and have a child, and in most cases go ahead and then thereafter raise the child. That child is in essence, not in essence, is in fact the legal offspring of one or both of the parents who neither of whom necessarily carried the child. Surrogacy has been somewhat in the spotlight these past 3 years here in Thailand because there were quite a few rather controversial cases that came up with respect to surrogacy. One involved a child born utilizing a surrogate. A child was born to two foreign national parents through a surrogate, and this child was born with Down syndrome, and it's been described that the parents, the biological parents, sort of abandoned the child. It became a rather controversial case. I'm not going to get into the facts of the underlying case, but just to say that it became sort of a controversy associated with that child, and that brought the matter to light. Then there was another case where an individual from another country outside of Thailand had been using surrogacy services here in Thailand to end up fathering, it was my understanding, was a number of children in the mid to upper teens. I can't remember the exact number of children that were allegedly fathered by this individual, but it was again that it made headlines. And in the court of public opinion here in Thailand, basically the result was that some serious legislative changes occurred, which changed the landscape, as it were, with respect to the legalities of surrogacy here in Thailand. Not to go too into detail, but it's best understood if the viewer sort of understands that prior to these legislative changes, this stuff wasn't exactly occurring in a vacuum, but basically one problem we always have as legal practitioners is the law looks backwards fundamentally, and it doesn't particularly look forwards. The law is oftentimes extremely sluggish in adapting to innovative technologies and in adapting to changing times. And this was really vividly seen in the circumstances involving surrogacy here in Thailand, where this technology came about. The law was such that essentially it was decades behind. The law was operating in such a way that it didn't even really, in a sense, comprehend how this technology worked. And the result of that was that we basically saw an era where it was relatively laissez-faire from the standpoint of law enforcement as far as surrogacy went. So you would see, I can remember I've dealt with matters that sort of pertain to surrogacy, the various documentation that comes about after the fact, for lack of a better term. In the past, you would see a lot of folks were coming here to Thailand to partake of surrogacy services and IVF services, in vitro fertilization, so that they could start their family. In a lot of cases, you saw matters involving same-sex couples, and this was another thing that came up. There was a rather high-profile case involving a same-sex couple trying to basically lock in their parental rights with respect to a child who was born as a result of surrogacy to a same-sex couple. These issues have sprung up relatively recently here. Thailand has reacted to some of these things. Most notably, one of the laws, and it's quite a mouthful, which is why I need to read it. Technologically Assisted Reproductive Medicine Surrogate Children Protection Act, BE 2558. That's 2015. This is basically a piece of legislation that came in to go ahead and address the surrogacy issue. It did that in spades. Effectively now, surrogacy is only really going to be possible within the framework as it sits, and it's my understanding, And again, consult a legal professional if you're very interested in dealing with this. You can contact us or contact somebody else who's qualified to deal with this. But the Thai attorneys have explained to me in the office that basically if it's surrogacy that's happening outside of the family context, so it's not a blood relation, like say a sister is acting as a surrogate for another sister who can't afford or who can't carry a child, or it's a cousin or something like this. It's family related. It's sort of intra-family. This is going to be allowed. The other thing is, with respect to surrogacy, it's my understanding it's really difficult under the law as it stands now to do much of anything surrogacy related. Really, the way the law likes it these days is, they want to see people married, and they don't really like surrogacy. And unless it's happening in a very close filial family context, I don't think it's going to be particularly easy, and nor is it going to be particularly... the enforcement of this stuff is becoming serious. It's quite stringent. An example of this is a gentleman was caught, or was apprehended, or was detained, I should say, at a border of Laos, between Laos and Thailand. He was apparently carrying materials that were kept in an extreme deep freeze. It remains to be seen as of the time of this filming exactly what this gentleman was supposedly carrying, but it's my understanding that it may or may not be either embryos, sperm, or eggs, and the use of which remains unknown to me. But this detainment is something that should be noted because it shows that the authorities here in Thailand do take this issue really, really seriously and are not particularly interested in a lax enforcement regime when it comes to the issue of surrogacy and of reproduction here in Thailand. So the main gist that it would be good to get from this video is surrogacy is quite heavily regulated compared to just a few years ago. There was sort of an interim twilight period where and I dealt with cases in this sort of twilight period where folks who had come in under the old regime, they had a surrogate that was still pregnant, they had done everything pursuant to the legal framework of the past, and they were sort of allowed to twilight, in sort of a twilight fashion, to basically get their child out of the children out of Thailand and back off to their home jurisdiction. It was my understanding embassies and consulates were especially helpful to those individuals who were dealing with this matter. The embassies were extremely helpful in assisting with documentation requests and things like this. But my point is, they allowed a period of time to sort of transition with respect to the law. But the law is very clear now. Surrogacy is not as easy as it once was. In fact, that's quite an understatement. In my opinion, it's rather difficult, bordering to the point of nearly impossible, I would say, under certain circumstances. And the other thing is where there are those operators out there in the community who are perhaps trying to circumvent these things by, again, like this gentleman who allegedly was going over a border into another country with certain reproductive material. The enforcement apparatus in Thailand is not interested in basically, for lack of a better term, looking the other way to facilitate that. This issue is something they do appear to take quite seriously, and for that reason, it's strongly encouraged anybody that's looking into this topic, seriously do your research. Very advisable to hire a legal professional beforehand to conduct the due diligence so that you understand what you're dealing with respect to a jurisdiction. And it's probably going to be pretty likely that, at least for surrogacy matters, Thailand might not be the best place to undertake such things. That being said, the IVF, the in vitro fertilization business, and the in vitro fertilization service providers here in the kingdom are apparently globally considered top-notch. So not so much for surrogacy matters, but for simple IVF between couples, that I believe is still totally a possibility. But the issue of surrogacy, it went from being rather sort of operating in a vacuum to being rather opaque to now we see the regime we're dealing with, and this regime is strict. I would argue it's stringent in its application of the law to the point of making surrogacy not a particularly viable option for foreign nationals wishing to undertake those services here in the kingdom.